Chapter 3: A Tear in the Seam. The visitor's room at Fort Leavenworth was a sterile, functional space designed less for comfort and more for control. Cinder block walls, painted a dull off-white, enclosed the room like a forgotten basement, the kind where conversations were meant to die. The air smelled of cheap disinfectant and old coffee, a scent that clung to the linoleum floor and the metal chairs bolted to the ground. A long plexiglass partition stretched across the middle of the room, dividing inmates from visitors. No warm embraces, no reassuring handshakes, just reinforced glass, thick enough to remind you that whatever life you once had was on the other side. A black phone was mounted on either side of the barrier, the only link between two worlds that would never touch. Shane was marched in, his wrists cuffed to a chain at his waist, his ankles shackled just tight enough to limit his strides. He'd stopped noticing the weight of the restraints weeks ago. They were just part of him now, the same way his inmate number had replaced his name, the same way his reflection in the scratched metal mirror of his cell barely looked like the soldier he used to be. 2 guards escorted him, one in front, one behind. Standard procedure. Nobody got left alone with a convicted murderer, even if he was just another uniform in a sea of forgotten men. "Sit," one of the guards ordered, voice flat. Shane lowered himself onto the chair, the metal cold even through his prison jumpsuit. He hadn't asked for a visitor. His parents had stopped coming after the sentencing, unable to look at him without breaking down. Most of his friends had disappeared the moment the conviction came down. He didn't blame them. Nobody wanted to be associated with the guy who got thrown in the brig for murder. So whoever the hell this was, it wasn't a friendly face. He looked across the glass. The man sitting on the other side wasn't military, but he carried himself like he'd been in the game before. And he probably had. It wasn't uncommon for officers to demand or bring in their own personal lawyers instead of state-appointed ones. His posture was too sharp, his shoulders squared like someone who still had discipline in his bones. Mid to late 30s, short dark hair neatly combed, sharp jawline just beginning to show hints of age. He was clean-shaven, but not in a way that screamed high-priced law firm, more like he did it out of habit. His suit was good quality, well-fitted, but not flashy. This wasn't a man who cared about impressing people with money. He cared about being taken seriously. Shane picked up the phone. The man did the same. "Shane Alexander," the man said, nodding once like he was confirming it for himself. His voice was steady, direct. "I'm Mike Chisholm." Shane didn't respond. He just stared, waiting. Chisholm exhaled, resting an arm on the table. "I know you didn't request this meeting, but I need you to hear me out." Shane glanced at the guards posted along the back wall, their hands resting near their batons. He turned back to Chisholm, glaring. "I already had a lawyer," he said, voice low. "Didn't do me much good." Chisholm's expression didn't change. If anything, there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Yeah," he said, "I read the transcripts. That's why I'm here." Shane narrowed his eyes. "Why?" "Because I work with military clients, and your trial was a goddamn mess." That got Shane's attention. Chisholm leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to keep the conversation from carrying to the guards. "I reviewed every piece of testimony, every motion, every ruling Judge Nolan made," he said. "Your court-appointed attorney, useless. The prosecution ran circles around him, and he didn't push back on half the things he should have. He let evidence get entered without challenge and let witnesses go unchecked. And that's before we get to the real problem." Shane stayed silent, but his grip on the receiver tightened. Chisholm leaned forward again, adjusting the way he sat like this conversation wasn't something he could afford to rush. "Like I said, I've been through your entire trial transcript," Chisholm began, his tone matter-of-fact. "Every page, every exchange between you and the prosecution, every single question that was asked of you. And let me tell you something, Alexander. The issues are glaring. Shane stiffened. Issues, he repeated, a small sneer pulling at his lips. What the hell are you talking about? The trial's done. They found me guilty. What's the point now? Chisholm held up a hand, his face calm but his eyes intent on Shane. The trial's not as solid as you think. You were railroaded, plain and simple. And that's not just me talking. You don't get sent to Leavenworth for nothing, especially when there's clear evidence of procedural errors that could have had a massive impact on the outcome. Shane shifted uncomfortably, eyes lowering to set at the floor. Chisholm knew that look, the look of a man who hadn't just lost his life, he'd lost his spirit too. Shane's eyes darted up and he stared at him skeptically. What kind of errors are we talking about? Chisholm leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. First off, the whole jury selection process was a disaster. Do you remember who was on your jury? Shane blinked. I don't know. I wasn't paying attention to that. Exactly. Chisholm's eyes were sharp now, his voice taking on a slight edge. But your court-appointed lawyer sure as hell should have been. He didn't bother to challenge any of the jurors who had biases. Hell, a few of them had direct military connections, and one was even married to someone in a high-ranking government position. He shook his head. That's a major conflict of interest, Alexander. A lawyer with half a brain would have raised hell about that, but yours didn't. And that's not all. There were questions about whether the prosecution had misrepresented your actions. They've got a history of playing fast and loose with facts, but your attorney didn't bother to challenge any of that either. Shane frowned. But they read the charges, didn't they? I mean, it was all laid out in front of me, right? The court heard it all. Chisholm exhaled sharply. Yeah, but here's the thing, Alexander. The trial record is also full of inconsistencies. When your testimony was read back to you, you were asked leading questions. Questions designed to make you say what they wanted you to. They controlled the narrative from the beginning. Shane was quiet, taking it in. Take the part where they asked about the shooting, Chisholm continued, voice dropping just enough to convey the weight of what he was about to say. Your defense attorney didn't ask a single follow-up question when they started twisting your words about what happened right before you shot. The prosecution was quick to suggest that you acted with premeditation, but there was no question about whether you were in a heightened state of fear, no challenge to the way they framed the events surrounding the incident. Shane shifted, a knot of discomfort tightening in his chest. I already told them what happened. And they took it at face value, Chisholm said, his voice getting quieter. But they didn't ask the right questions. They never addressed the evidence of the ambush or the fact that there was a lot of confusion about the events leading up to the shooting. Shane rubbed a hand over his face. So, what? No one gave a real rat's ass about it? Pretty much. Chisholm's gaze softened a little, though his tone remained firm. The prosecution had evidence that contradicted the charges against you, testimony from soldiers who were there, records that showed there was no clear line of sight to the target at the time of the shooting, but none of it was presented. And do you know why? Shane looked up, suspicion creeping into his thoughts. Why? Chisholm paused for a beat, his gaze steady and sharp. Because it didn't fit their story. It didn't help them build the case they needed to convict you. Shane stared at him, disbelief settling in his chest. You're saying they hid stuff from my defense? Chisholm nodded. Exactly. It's right there in the record, and your defense attorney didn't pick up on it, didn't push for the right subpoenas to get the evidence out in the open. Shane felt the heat building up, but he kept his temper in check. So what? They just let me take the fall for it all? Let me rot in here for something I didn't do? Chisholm's face darkened slightly, but his voice remained calm. That's exactly what they did. And your attorney was so focused on just getting the trial over with that he didn't notice the loopholes in the case, and now you're paying for it." Shane gritted his teeth, trying his hardest to keep himself from slamming the receiver and cutting the line. "You said that they want to keep me in. I don't know how the fuck you're gonna get me out if they got the damn keys." Chisholm didn't answer him straight away. Instead, he inhaled deeply and continued. "Your unit's engagement in Bosnia was never properly classified as a combat operation." His voice was softer than before, and he lowered his eyes for a brief moment, understanding the need to let the boy breathe. "That means the rules of engagement weren't clear-cut, and yet you were tried as if they were. The prosecution framed it like you executed a civilian in cold blood, but they ignored the chain of command, the intel reports, and the context of the firefight leading up to it. None of that was adequately presented. That's malpractice." Shane looked like he was about to break someone's bones with his bare hands. He'd sat through that trial, listened to men in pressed uniforms dissect his actions and twist his decisions until he barely recognized them. He'd been painted as reckless, as someone who had crossed the line between soldier and killer, but he hadn't. He knew he hadn't. "I see," he muttered, his voice edged with doubt. "Think about it, Alexander." Chisholm met his eyes. "I'm telling you, there's a chance we can appeal." Shane exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "And why the hell do you care?" For the first time, Chisholm hesitated, just a beat. Then he leaned back slightly, expression unreadable. "Because I've seen good men go down for bad reasons," he said, "and I've seen what happens when no one gives a damn to fix it." Something about the way he said it made Shane pause. This wasn't just a job to him. It would have been easy to write Chisholm off as another lawyer looking for a headline, a pro bono case to boost his reputation. But the way he spoke, the way he laid it all out without sugarcoating a damn thing, made Shane reconsider. He studied the man for a long moment. "So what's your angle?" "You asked the same thing over and over, boy." Chisholm smirked faintly. "My angle is getting you out of here. I'm really gonna need you to cooperate with me here. You up for that?" Shane didn't answer right away. He glanced around the room at the guards watching him like he was just another inmate, at the reflection of himself in the plexiglas, the man in the brown jumpsuit, the inmate number stitched across his chest where his name used to be. If Chisholm was right, if there was even a chance that the trial had been rigged from the start, then the last 3 months had been for nothing. He met Chisholm's gaze. "All right," he said. "Let's hear it." The metal chair beneath Shane felt harder than it had 10 minutes ago, maybe because now he was bracing against it. Across the plexiglas, Chisholm sat forward slightly, phone pressed to his ear, eyes locked onto Shane with the kind of persistence that made it clear he wasn't going anywhere. "I need the whole story," Chisholm added, "not the one they wrote in the trial record, the real one." Shane didn't answer. Chisholm waited for a beat. Then, when Shane still said nothing, he sighed. "Look, I know you've spent months keeping your mouth shut. You think it doesn't matter what you say because they already decided you were guilty before you ever set foot in that courtroom." He held Shane's gaze. "And I get it. But if you want a shot at getting out of here..." He paused. Controlling his voice once more, he swallowed before adding, "I would suggest that you reconsider your silence." Shane scoffed, shaking his head. "There's nothing to talk about." Chisholm tilted his head slightly. "Bullshit." The sharpness in his tone was back. The guy spoke like a damn CO. Shane sucked his teeth, furrowing his brows. The lawyer leaned in just a fraction, lowering his voice. "You don't get sent to Leavenworth for nothing. You don't get thrown under the bus, stripped of your career and locked in a cell because of nothing." He sat back again, giving Shane space to react. "You're a soldier, goddammit. You were there, you got eyes, You lived it. And whatever happened in Bosnia didn't just occur on the shooting day. So go on, boy. Tell me the whole thing right from the very beginning. Shane's fingers curled into fists in his lap, the heavy cuffs shifting against his wrists. I already told my story. No, you gave testimony, Chisholm countered. Testimony you were coached into giving by an incompetent lawyer who was more interested in keeping the trial moving than actually defending you. His voice remained even, but his words hit like a slap. I read that transcript, and you know what I see? A guy answering questions like he's been told to stick to a script. A guy who's holding back. Shane exhaled sharply, looking away. Chisholm let the silence stretch. When he spoke again, his voice was calm but insistent. I get it. You don't want to go back there. Bosnia, the trial, none of it. But we can't fix this if you don't give me something to work with. Shane's whole face stiffened. The last thing he wanted was to go back there. He'd spent 3 months in this prison trying to force it all into a locked box in the back of his head, burying it under the routine. Wake up, chow, work detail, count, lockdown, repeat. He kept his head down, didn't engage, didn't let himself dwell. Now this guy wanted him to drag it all back out, and he shook his head. There's nothing to fix. Chisholm exhaled sharply. Alexander. I shot him, Shane snapped, his voice low but sharp as a blade. I pulled the goddamn trigger. That's it. That's the whole story. Chisholm didn't even blink. No, it's not. Shane looked away again, his pulse pounding in his ears. I ain't blind, boy. Men don't put on that damn uniform all protecting the people and lose that spark in their eyes for nothing. The lawyer studied him for a moment. Then, voice quiet but edged with steel, he said, You're still protecting someone, aren't you? Shane's head snapped back to him, his glare sharp enough to cut. Chisholm just nodded to himself like he'd confirmed something. Yeah, that's what I thought. Shane felt his pulse hammering against his skin. His gut tightened. You think you're doing the right thing, Chisholm went on, taking the fall, keeping quiet. But let me tell you how this ends if you don't talk. He gestured vaguely at the room. You spend the next 4 decades in here, and the people who actually screwed you walk away clean. Is that what you want? Shane looked away again, staring at the floor, shoulders rigid. There was a time when he would have fought back, argued, told Chisholm he didn't know what the hell he was talking about. But the truth was, Chisholm wasn't wrong. Not entirely, at least. And that made this worse. Any sane person would agree. If there was even a sliver of a chance that he hadn't deserved to be here, if there was even a chance that he'd been set up to take the hit for something bigger, then that meant he'd let them win by keeping his mouth shut. I know what you're doing, Chisholm repeated, voice quieter now. You think if you don't say it out loud, it won't be real. But it's already real, Alexander. The only difference is whether you rot in here for it or whether you fight back. Shane's fingers flexed against his cuffs. His breath felt heavier. Chisholm waited, watching him carefully. Finally, after a long beat of silence, Shane exhaled sharply. He shifted in his chair, then rolled his shoulders back like he was bracing for impact. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet. You want to hear it? He met Chisholm's eyes. Fine. He inhaled sharply, closing his eyes briefly before exhaling through his nose. Then, after a pause, he said the words that would pull them both into the past. It started long before the day of the shooting. It started when we landed in Bosnia in '97.